broad question. There's a lot of ways that I could go with this. Who am I? Well, the name that my parents gave me is Connor Fields. I was born in Texas, but I moved to Las Vegas when I was 4. So I'm pretty much as Vegas as it gets. I guess my defining thing that people would say who I am is an Olympic athlete, an Olympic gold medalist. But I like to think that I'm a little bit more than that.
Okay. And tell me about when you were a kid and like how you looked at the world and what, you thought you were going to do when you grew up, things like that.
Oh, yeah, man. Going back, I had a wonderful childhood. I think back, and I think my age, I was kind of the last age that had a pre-phone childhood. So I remember, knocking on my friends' doors, riding my bike to their house, and knocking on their doors and saying, "Do you want to come play outside?" And you would know where everybody was because that's where all the bikes and skateboards were sitting on somebody's lawn. Just a very standard middle-class childhood, I guess, from the 90s. And I look back fondly. I had a lot of kids in my neighborhood, and we did some awesome stuff. We were also sometimes some troublemakers and, ding-dong ditching and toilet paper in houses and that kind of mischief, but we had a good time. And yeah, even in high school, like I had a Motorola Razr, and I think the iPhone came out like my junior or senior year. So we were like the last generation before social media. And I'm thankful for that. But growing up, I loved sports and I loved being outside and just moving and doing anything I could active. My parents got me into all sorts of sports as a kid. I played soccer, t-ball, flag football, basketball, did all the normal stuff that an athletic kid would do. And my parents kind of found BMX racing, which ended up being my sport randomly. I learned how to ride a bike when I was 7, and I happened to have a flat tire on my bike. My mom had taken my bike to the bike shop to get it fixed. And when she was there, she found a flyer advertising the local BMX racing track called Medalist BMX out by the Air Force Base. And she was like, "Oh, my son has endless amounts of energy. Maybe this will burn some of it off." And so she took me out the next week to watch. And I remember being like from day number 1 thinking it was just the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I wanted to go. The next week we went back and I had my helmet on in the car. I was so excited to get there. I continued to play other sports for a few more years. At that time, if you think back to when you're 8, 9 years old, everybody kind of plays the same amount of minutes. It's, you keep score, but it's about having fun and fairness, and it's co-ed a lot of times. But I was always competitive. I wanted to win. Like, I was not the kid who was picking daisies in the outfield. I was yelling at the kid picking daisies in the outfield. That was just who I was. My parents did not push me to be like that. That was just me. And there was a story, my dad loves to tell this story, but there's a story of me playing rec basketball league at a Silver Springs Rec Center. And, it was the age where everybody plays the same amount of minutes and it's about fairness. A couple minutes left in the game and we were losing, and the coach takes me out to put in somebody who I thought I was better than. I looked at the coach and I said, "No." I said, "I'm better than him. I'm not coming out." And coach said, "You've had your time, Connor. It's their turn." And I refused to leave the court because I wanted to win. It was nothing more than I wanted to win. And I sat down in center court and I refused to leave, and I threw a full tantrum. And my dad had to come out of the stands, pick me up, and carry me off the court. And it was kind of at that moment where he's like, maybe an individual sport is more suited for you. Thinking back, I think you have to get through the childhood years and even through some of the high school years. And if you get to college, most people are taking it seriously. You get to the pros, and obviously everybody's going to be taking it seriously. But I was approaching it with the same intensity as a pro when I was 9, which is not, reasonable to expect others to do that. So from that moment on, it was kind of full gas on the BMX racing. And that was, the defining thing of my childhood. I was always riding a bike, whether it was at the track racing or I was just riding around the neighborhood with my friends. I would build wooden ramps and jump as far as I could. And I was lucky that I found my passion. I found what I loved more than anything. If I wasn't riding, I was watching BMX videos. It was the days of DVDs and even VHS before that. I had all the tapes, and it was just my thing. And my parents did a really good job of using it as a way to teach me things. When I was a kid, it wasn't an Olympic sport. There wasn't collegiate scholarships for it yet. There really wasn't an end game. but my parents used it as a way to teach me discipline or accountability, things like that, where they said, hey, if you want to go racing this weekend, you have to do these chores. Or they would say, hey, if you don't keep a certain grade point average, we are not going to take you to all the events. And, they did a really good job with that. And because of that, I learned balance. I learned how to both compete and be dedicated to my sport, but also to pay attention to my academics. And my parents made me play an instrument. Here's another fun story. My mom said you have to have balance. You can't just play sports all day. You need to learn an instrument. You can pick any instrument, but you're going to take a lesson, music lessons. And I kicked and screamed, and I said, I don't want to, Mom. And as kind of payback, thinking back, I was petty even from a young age. I picked the drums because it was the loudest thing that I could possibly pick. So at 8 in the morning on a Saturday morning, I'm upstairs playing the drums. And I loved it. I played the drums for a few years. I won the 5th grade talent show playing In Bloom by Nirvana. He put me in a drum set. Now I can still do In Bloom, like the hook or a couple pieces of it, but yeah, my parents did a great job. So I had a wonderful childhood. But I guess in conclusion, I rambled, but in conclusion, I was really born with an innate competitiveness and drive. I wanted to be the best.
That's awesome. What was your first bike?
It was a Haro. It was a dirt jumper. It wasn't a racing bike. It was a bike that was meant to go to skate parks and ride on the dirt jumps and things like that. And it was actually a replica of a rider named Ryan Nyquist, who was really big in the late 90s, early 2000s, who's actually now a friend, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's cool that things come full circle like that.
Yeah, he's the head coach for the U.S. freestyle BMX team, and we speak regularly.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on, a little bit of your childhood. Were there any significant memories that really stood out that, kind of were a bookmark in your history that you really remember?
Oh, I've got a few. I really think back, like a couple of random things that pop into my mind immediately is Guitar Hero. My buddies in my neighborhood and I, there was like 4 of us, we loved the game Guitar Hero. That was like middle school. We would go to each other's houses after school and just turn it up and rock. And I really think that led to why I love rock music now and going to concerts. And, I never played the guitar, but we would turn it up and listen to, whether it was Metallica or Slipknot or, Guns N' Roses or whoever the Guitar Hero game was. That sticks out. As well as, when I got to high school, I had a wonderful high school experience. I met some great friends, and I got to live, the stereotypical American high school experience, whether it was going to football games on Friday, somebody's parents were out of town, we're going to go over there and, have a little party and do all that stuff. I really think back to a lot of positive memories, both within my sport, which was very important to me, and then just being a kid. I think back to summer nights, in high school, and we would be out hanging out at the park next to my house till midnight and just hanging out, doing nothing, just being kids. And it was a wonderful way to grow up.
That's awesome. So when you were a kid, did you have like dreams and aspirations of like, what you wanted to be when you grew up? And, did they change from, when you were a kid till?
Totally. I mean, I think the first thing I wanted to be was a paleontologist. I loved dinosaurs as a kid. I loved the land before time. And I had all these replicas of dinosaurs. And then when I was 8, 9 years old, people would come over, my parents' friends would come over, and I would show them, this is a Stegosaurus, this is a Triceratops, this is a Tyrannosaurus, and I just loved it. Then I got older, and I actually wanted to be a history teacher. History was my favorite subject. I really liked it. I'm kind of black and white as a person. I'm really working on it, just personally trying to live in the gray area and be better at that. But I'm very black and white, and so history was very easy because, what year did this happen? Who discovered this? Who won this battle? Now, sure, you can get into history was written by the winners, and maybe it's not as black and white as we think it is. But when I was a kid, I liked that it was very black and white, where I would turn in an English assignment, and I would be confused as to why I didn't get a good grade, or different things like that. And then as I got older, I wanted to be a professional BMXer, but I didn't really know what that meant or what that would look like or what would go into it. But I knew that's what I wanted to do. And really that kind of hit at 15 when I was, the summer between sophomore and junior year of high school. I watched the 2008 Beijing Olympics on TV. And that was when BMX racing made its Olympic debut. And we were the first action sport that was added to the Summer Olympic Games. In the Winter Olympics, action sports had come in earlier with snowboarding and half pipe and things like that. And then kind of the Shaun White effect in the Winter Olympics inspired the Summer Games to start bringing in some of those more action sports. Now, skateboarding's in it, surfing's in it, freestyle BMX is in it, but BMX racing was first. We were kind of the trial. And I stayed up all night to watch that very first race. And it was around 3 a.m. And I just thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I'd seen plenty of BMX before on DVDs and VHS, but never to the scale of the Olympics, and just everything that goes into it, from the size of the crowds to how pretty visually the facilities look, to seeing the medals around their neck and like how much fanfare was going into it, and then seeing the Americans get silver and bronze and then get all these interviews, and they're on a McDonald's bag, and all these really amazing things. I was like, I want to do that. So from that moment on, it was basically, chips were all in. I'm going to try to go to the Olympics. And my parents had to kind of rein me back and say, we'll give you every opportunity, but you have to maintain that balance. You have to make sure that you continue to do well in school. You have to make sure that you continue to have a life outside of it as well. And, in their mind, they probably were thinking like, okay, pipe dream, we're going to let you go for this, but we got to make sure you've got a fallback plan because it's probably not going to work. Again, credit to them. But from about 15 on, it was all in. That's all I wanted to do.
That's awesome. And what were some of the challenges, from then to achieving that goal?
Basically, the way I would explain it is, if I just told somebody right now, pick your favorite sport, you want to go to the Olympics in 4 years, where do you start? You're like, I don't know. It's like, where do you go from here? You have to get to the Olympic trials, but how do you get to the Olympic trials? You have to make the national team, but how do you make the national team? You can't just pick up the phone and call the head coach and say, hey, what do I have to do? There's all these layers and details, and it's not easy, especially when I was so young. I was 15. At the time, I think the youngest athlete on the team was maybe 19, 20. So it was still like very early developmental stage. So I just started trying to win whatever race was in front of me and be the best 15-year-old in the nation and the best 16-year-old in the nation. And I kind of started to take it seriously and train then. I would practice before that, but I think there's a difference between practicing and training. Again, credit to my parents. They bought some dumbbells and some gym equipment and put it in my garage, and I would come home from school and just lift weights. And my parents were probably excited because, while other people were out, getting into trouble or potentially drinking and drugs, I was just working out. and my parents were able to trust that, I had fun. But within reason. Like, I would go to parties and not drink all the time because I had training the next day, or I was trying to be dedicated to win the next race. And I think for, looking back for them growing up, it was like, all right, cool. What's easier, buying him some gym equipment or having to deal with a kid who's getting into, the bad stuff? But yeah, I just worked. That's all. I really all was, like 7 days a week. I just worked. I look back at what I was doing, and I bought Muscle and Fitness magazine, and I was doing like meathead bodybuilding stuff, 5 sets of 10 Arnold press. Like, that's not going to help me at BMX racing, but I was giving it everything I had. I just didn't know any better. And then as I continued to advance, I continued to meet more people and learn more about what it actually took. And then kind of more focus that energy into things that were going to help me more. But looking back, like, I set a lot of records for the youngest person to ever do anything. I was the youngest athlete to podium at a World Cup. I was the youngest American to make the Olympic team in my sport. I was, the youngest of a lot of things. And that was because I put so much work in at a young age when I didn't even really know what I was doing, but I was doing something. Yeah. And I wanted it Like, I can truly say that I wanted it more than everybody else who was my age. And eventually people caught up, right, as they got older and they realized what was on the line. But shoot, looking back, I didn't even care about how much money I was going to make, or even know. Like, I didn't care. I just wanted to win whatever race was in front of me.
Yeah. Man. So you were staying out of trouble while everyone else was having fun in school?
Well, look, I mean, I got into a little trouble. I had a little bit of fun, but it was within reason. I was very dedicated to what I was doing. So I always had in the back of my mind, from a young age, how is this going to affect my future? Most 16-year-olds aren't thinking about that. I wasn't going to get drunk and get behind the wheel of a car because I wanted to be able to drive to the BMX track. Like, that was all it was. I wasn't thinking, about, this is going to sound bad. I wasn't thinking about, like, oh, I don't want to be drunk on the road because I could potentially injure myself or others. It was like, I don't want to get my license taken away because I need to go to the BMX track, right? And, yeah, sure, it sounds a bit silly, but, like, it worked. It kept me on the straight and narrow because I was so focused on my goals that I was able to stay out of trouble. But, like I said, I had a great childhood, did great high school experience. I did all the things that normal high school kids do, but within reason because of what I was working towards.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what were some of the toughest challenges that you had to face to accomplish those goals? You said you worked out, you sacrificed a lot, throughout school, but as you're moving on, like what were some of the toughest battles you had to face?
I think, the biggest, toughest battle that I can really talk about would be like my first Olympic experience. But bringing it back even before that, when I graduated from high school and all my friends went to college and they all started having these amazing college experiences, I was going to bed at 8 p.m., getting up at 6 and training and not doing that. And my parents, made a deal. They would support me through the London Olympics, which was in 2012. So I graduated in 2010. I had 2 years before the Olympics, and they basically said, you can live at home. We'll support you as you work towards this Olympic goal. But after the Olympics is done, you're out. You're on your own. And, you better start thinking about going to college. And so I just dedicated for those 2 years everything that I could to trying to make the Olympics. And, I was going to be 19. No 19-year-old had ever made the games before. I was, going to be competing against a lot of athletes, some of them 10 years older than me. But I watched all my friends, start to have college experiences, and then I wasn't having them. And then injuries started to set in because the older you get, the faster you get, the harder you fall. And the more serious your injuries get. When I was 17, I lacerated my spleen and I had internal bleeding, flight for life. I had knee surgery when I was 18. I had a couple of back-to-back injuries, and that, didn't make me not want to do it, but you definitely start thinking a little bit when you're spending a lot of time in bed, recovering. And then looking forward to the Olympics, I ended up, there as the number one seed in the final for all intents and purposes, had an amazing chance to win, and then I didn't. And I'm 19 years old, and then I get back home and I realize that my entire dream just shattered, and I choked on the world stage in front of billions of people. And seemingly at the time, all that work was for nothing. And I got 7th place. And, when I'm doing my keynote speeches, I talk about how there's 4 things you can get at the Olympics. You can get gold, silver, bronze, or a participation certificate. And that's it. You get first, second, third, or last, essentially. And there's 2 kinds of athletes that go to the Olympics. And there's certain athletes that just making the Olympics is their goal. They know they have no shot at a medal. Somebody's got to get 20th in every sport. And especially sports that are timed, such as track and field or swimming, and you're in a lane, you know that your best time is the 15th fastest time in the world, right? Compared to 14 other athletes who are faster than you. So even if 5 of them mess up, 3 of them wake up sick, and somebody false starts, you're still not getting a medal, In every sport, there's 5 or so athletes and teams that know that if they have their day, they've got a chance to go home with some hardware. And so for those athletes, they're there for business. it's success or failure. The other athletes that are just, there to do their best, they're there to have fun, they enjoy the experience, but they don't feel the same level of pressure. I was always on that second tier, the one that was there to get a medal. So for me, I failed miserably. I got home and I was depressed. I didn't know what to do. It's not like you can put that energy into something that's going to come next month, next year. You got 4 years. And, when you're 19 years old, 4 years is a large percentage of your life. You're trying to, 4 years ago, I was 15. I got to wait another 4 years for this. And so that was probably, the lowest I can remember ever being, was that 6 months. I was also dealing with some personal stuff too. Like, my parents got divorced, and, there's like the coming of age realization that the world isn't all sunshine and rainbows, combined with, all my dreams are shattered in front of me. What the heck am I going to do now? All at the same time, which was a lot for a kid to handle at the time, looking back. And, I wish I could tell that young guy, hey man, it's going to be okay. You're going to get through this.
Yeah. So as things kind of started unraveling, at that time frame, what did you do with that next 4 years?
Well, immediately I knew that I wanted to try again. And I didn't want to, I had to. I had to fix it. And if I'd gotten beat by 3, 5, 10 riders who I felt were just better than me, that's sport. You shake their hand, you say good job, you go home and you try to get better. But I didn't do my best, and I was mad at myself because I felt like I'd let myself down. And so for me, it was like I had to get back there for myself, and I had to just get everything back on the table and see what that would get me. And so for 4 years, I dedicated everything to being the best that I could be, but also learning how I could execute when it mattered the most, how I could get to that big moment. And I don't think that it's possible for anybody who hasn't been in that moment to grasp what it feels like. I can tell you about it. But when I tell you that you've just trained for 4 years, the entire world is watching you, the crowd is silent, and that gate is about to drop, or that gun is about to go, or the ball is about to be tipped, or whatever your sport is. And everything comes down to this. And if you execute, you can change the trajectory of your life and your family's life forever, especially depending on where you're from, what sport you're in, etc. Or you could mess it up and you may never get this chance ever again. And like the seriousness and the heaviness of that moment is just insane. And to think that I did it multiple times, like, I don't know, it gives me anxiety just to think about it now. I'm glad I don't have to do it again. But I started working with a sports psychologist and trying to figure out, what can I do to be ready when that moment comes? Because you can't practice that moment. I can practice everything else. I can do as many practice starts as I want, as many conditioning laps as I want. I can lift as much weight as I want, but you can't replicate that moment. It's Game 7 of the World Series, bottom of the ninth, 2 on. You got to bring one in to win. You can't replicate that moment no matter how many at-bats you get. So it was just trying to figure out what I could do to put myself in a position to be ready for it when it came. And so, that next moment in 2016 at the 2016 Olympics was 4 years in the making. There was a lot of trial and error. And depending on your sport, a lot of people know this, but, for a sport like mine, which is a sport that the general population cares about for 1 day every 4 years, we have a lot of races going on in between those 4 years. There's 2 years of qualification to even make the Olympics. There's World Championships, World Cups, National Championships. But compared to the Olympics, they don't mean anything. I would trade every win that I had in my entire career for an Olympic win. Like, it's that much bigger of a scale. So, I could work on it at World Cups or National Championships or things like that. But it was a lot of just having faith in myself that I would get back to that moment and that I could deliver, that I could do it. And, it was a double-edged sword, because part of you is like, why would I want to put myself back in that moment again? Because it could go either way. You could do it, crush the demon, win the Olympics, and it's amazing. You also could mess it up again and then dig yourself even further into the hole that you may never get out. And, I didn't have any doubt, though. I wanted to be back in that moment, and I wanted another crack at it.
Yeah. So you and the psychologist did some work, and you had some some skills to go into it.
Absolutely. We did a lot of stuff, as far as mental skills to be ready for peak performance, but also just personal growth and development. I was a young man at the time. 19 to 23 was the range, but I was dealing with a lot of real life, real world stuff. I mean, I moved out and lived on my own from 19, trying to run a business, which was my racing career. Dealing with sponsors and requirements and appearances and this and that, and the low level fame that comes with being an Olympic athlete, and then I'm a 20-year-old kid. I could barely cook chicken pasta for dinner. Like my friends are all in fraternities at parties, calling me to come to the frat party, and I'm like, I can't. I've got practice in the morning, and then I've got a meeting with my accountant. Like, looking back, it's easy to see how a lot of young men and women, when they get in a high level sport, go off the deep end because it's a lot to handle. I lucky I had good people around me. My agent was great. He was a great person to mentor me and to guide me in the right direction. My family was still there. I had good people around me. But yeah, looking back, it was a lot for still a kid to handle.
Yeah. And kind of shift a little bit to like your values and things that you hold near and dear to your heart. So do you have like tenet core values that maybe you grew up with or you developed along the way that helped guide you, and what do those values look like?
I haven't like sat down and thought about the word values, but what comes to mind to me is discipline, work ethic. I love the feeling of working really hard and then achieving something, whether it's within racing or anything else. I also think that you need to help give back once you have and pass on what you have learned. I think the constant growth and continued learning is very important to me. I see a lot of people who they get to a point and they're just like, okay, I'm done. This is who I am. And I hope to continue to learn and better myself and gain new skills up until the day that I'm no longer here. I think it's so cool when I hear about, a 60 or 70-year-old who's learning a new language. Like, I have so much respect for that, and I hope to continue to do that. And then I guess for me now, we haven't gotten into it yet, but having a near-death experience, just being grateful and not sweating the small stuff as much, and really just enjoying every single day and keeping things positive. It's so easy, especially these days. You can open your phone and be inundated with depressing rage bait all day. It takes a little bit of work now to not give into that and just to be grateful, positive, and try to be a light in this world. Those are all things that are important to me that kind of come to mind when you say values.
Yeah. Awesome.
I should sit down though one day and actually write down. I wrote down values when it came to a relationship. I did do that and figure out what I was looking for in a relationship. But maybe I need to do it for myself too.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when I was in the military, each military branch, they have, their core values, and, those are the driving force behind everything. And as long as you're following those, you'll always be in the right. That's why I kind of like to ask, maybe it's not specifically, your listed values, but, it's awesome listing, hard work, dedication, growth, and, giving back. So I think that's awesome. Yeah. So you kind of touched on it just now. What was your toughest challenge that you had to face, and how did you overcome that? What got you through it?
Well, I thought my toughest challenge was being 19 and having the world crumble. But the real toughest challenge was waking up in a hospital bed in Japan after being in a coma for 7 days. Or 5 days. I forget. I was sleeping. It's a very unique experience that I had that not many can have. I woke up on the morning of whatever, July 30th, I think it was, 2021, as the defending Olympic gold medalist, a professional athlete, sponsored by Ralph Lauren, Monster Energy Drink, GoPro, world at my fingertips. And I woke up 7 days later with a traumatic brain injury, broken ribs, collapsed lung, torn labrum, torn bicep, and a career that was over. And so, it's pretty two different ends of the spectrum. And it was COVID, so I was alone in Japan. No friends, no family. Nobody could get over there. And nobody spoke English when I woke up to tell me what was going on. So I reach over. My phone was next to me. They had left it there. And I reach over and I open my phone and like 500 text messages. Everybody I've ever met. Because if you have an accident during the Olympics, the whole world sees it. And everybody, asks me if I'm okay. And I'm like, what the heck? So then I open something. And, it's, ABC, ESPN, NBC, Fox, CNN, every single news outlet in the world talking about this Olympic athlete who might die. And so I'm like piecing together what the heck just happened. And then from there, that was obviously the shock. But then from there, I had to completely reinvent myself at 28 years old because my career ended. And I had to really look in the mirror and say, okay, who am I? As long as I can remember, I was Connor Fields, the BMX racer. That was it. And, I did do a lot of other things throughout my career, and I did always know it was going to end, and I continued to plan and prepare for that. But there's a difference between, I went to school. I have a degree. It took me 9 years to get it, but I got a degree in 2020. I graduated. But there's a difference between like attending school and getting a degree with the plans of one day knowing you're going to need to do something. There's a difference between that and then just waking up one day and like, all right, it's here. You can't be this person anymore. You got to completely reinvent yourself. There's not really a playbook for that. And there's not really a, step-by-step manual. And then you throw in the fact of I had a traumatic brain injury. My brain didn't work properly for, 8 months. And we weren't sure for a long time if it was even going to finish recovering and be okay. That trumps any challenge that I ever faced before. And I don't know if I'll ever face a challenge quite like that. I'm sure throughout life is long, I'll face challenges, but that one was very unique, and I hope to never have anything like it again.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty scary. I remember watching it and following everything, and that's not easy to overcome. And now, here you are, back to normal for the most part.
As normal as I was before. I always ask the question like, did you make a full recovery? And the truth is, there's no way to know because you don't take a really deep in-depth test just in case you have a traumatic brain injury, and every brain injury is different. So all we had to go off of was, how did I compare to people in my age bracket with my education level, and can I do everything that I could do before at the same level? And the answer to both of those was yes and very good. So I could do everything that I could do before at the same level. People that know me best say I'm the same. And compared to people between the ages of 25 and 30 with a college graduate, I was above average. So those are the only 2 points we have to go off of. I don't know if I feel different. I don't know if maybe my memory is not quite as good. I don't know if maybe I don't have quite as sharp of wit. There's no way to know. So I try to, I use humor as my defense. So I like to say I'm just as smart or as dumb as I was before. Yeah. But very grateful because there was a lot of days where I wasn't sure. And that was the scariest part of rehabilitation was not knowing. You break a bone, you can go x-ray it and see how your healing is doing. There's no way to know if the brain's going to be okay. And there might be parts of my brain that are dead or don't work anymore, but the brain figured out a way to make it work around that. I learned a lot about the brain, and for everything we do know about the brain, we don't know anything about the brain. Mm-hmm. I learned about neuroplasticity and how the brain can kind of rewire itself to meet the needs that you're trying to get from it, even if there's certain pieces of it that don't work anymore. And the brain is incredible. And I'm very grateful. I had an amazing team of people around me. If you're going to get hurt, the Olympics is the place to do it. you get the best care in America. So, and hey, I didn't get a single bill, you know. So, you know, there was some positives. If you're gonna have it happen, that's the place to do it. But with that being said, you know, it changed my perspective on everything because I'm just happy to be here at a base level. Even on a bad day, I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy that I can function to the level that I am functioning now. You know, I make jokes about it, but like I get to wake up every morning and decide what I want to do for the rest of my life. There's times I didn't know if I could do that. There was phone call. My dad had to take a phone call that said, "You're not allowed to come to Japan because it's COVID. But if your son dies, you can fly over and escort his body home." And my father had to take that call.
Yeah.
And so the fact that I'm sitting here having this conversation with you, amazing.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I've got some housework to do later. Can't wait. Let's do it. You know, and it truly has changed my perspective. And I've talked to other people who have had near-death experiences. And for the most part, everybody has that common thread of you don't sweat the small stuff quite as much anymore. You have a bit more of a gratitude mindset for everything, and you look at everything as an opportunity now versus before you were like, oh, I can't believe I've got to do that. You're like, no, I get to do that. Yeah. Look, don't get me wrong. There's like I'm not excited to do my taxes, or I'm not excited to, you know, to vacuum. But I'm like, all right, cool. Like I get to vacuum.
Yeah.
You know, I made a little money, so I get to pay taxes. Awesome. You know, it's a mindset shift.
Yeah, you can have a lot of problems until it comes to your health, and you only have one problem.
Try waking up in the morning and not knowing if you're ever going to be okay. And my rehabilitation was literally doing 5th grade level word puzzles and, you know, brain teasers and things like that. And I was sitting there looking at this crossword puzzle at elementary level, and like my brain was good enough to know that I should be able to do it, but I couldn't. And then when I could finally do it, my next challenge was to do it with distraction. So I went to a coffee shop, and I had to do it when there was noise around. And as soon as there was something else that my brain had to also think about, I couldn't do it anymore. I love working at a coffee shop. Who doesn't? You sit there, you know, you drink your latte, you do a little work. I couldn't do it. And so like that was part of my rehabilitation, was learning how to have music and background white noise in one ear, and then also continue to do what I had to do. And so when you're at that level, and then you find out like, oh, you're 3 months in, you're starting to feel a little bit better. My shoulder kind of hurts. Oh, shoulder reconstruction. We didn't even realize my shoulder was messed up because we were just too worried about my brain. You know, you go through all that, and then you're like, you know, I'm not going to sweat small stuff. If someone's going to road rage me on the way home, I don't care. Have a good day. Like,
yeah. So with all of that, you know, you have a pretty full life experience, and you know, you talked about giving back to others before.
Bro, I'm only 32. I don't have where am I going to put the next 40 years or something?
Do you have wisdom and advice for A, your younger self, B, you know, those coming up, you know, maybe following in your footsteps?
Yeah, you know, and it's like the most stereotypical old guy advice to a young guy. I wouldn't want to tell myself anything because I really like the way everything turned out. Like, sure, I almost won 3 Olympic gold medals. I came up short on one, just personal mistake when I was a kid, had the injury when I was older. But I really like the way my life's turned out. So I wouldn't want the butterfly effect to change anything. But with that being said, the classic advice that I would give is enjoy it. You know, when you're a kid, you just want to grow up. You know, you can't wait to grow up. And then you grow up and you're like, I used to just have nap time, you know. I used to wake up on Saturday morning and have nothing to do. You know, it's just, when I was an athlete, I hated elements of training. I did it. Nobody wants to look at their gym program and see 10 sets of 10 with 2-minute recovery and know that they're not going to be able to walk tomorrow, to know that sitting on the toilet's going to hurt tomorrow. That's not fun. I couldn't wait to be done. And I'm not going to say that I, you know, would tell my younger self to enjoy that. But don't be in such a hurry. Just be present is, I think, the advice that I would give myself. I don't miss anything about training. I miss the 15 minutes before a race when nothing in the world mattered. The whole world stopped. except for that one moment. It was like a sense of meditation or Zen, and I was ready to just rip somebody's head off. I don't really get to do that anymore. And when I try to find that feeling now, whether it's just, set myself a challenge that I really wanted to get back in the 400-pound club for squats. I wanted to squat 400 again, like I could when I was competing. So I did 6 months of training to do it, and it felt awesome. But I was at the gym by the house doing some squats, right? And I was talking to my therapist about this, and I'm like, it just doesn't feel the same. And my therapist was like, Connor, you were training to win the Olympics. Nothing's probably ever going to feel the same. You could go create an amazing business. You could do a public speech, a keynote speech for 50,000 people. Nothing you do is ever going to be the same as trying to win the Olympics. And that was kind of a realization moment for me. Like, man, that was really cool. And so circling it back, I wish I could tell myself, like, hey, you're having some experiences right now when you're so young that you're never going to get to have again. Just be present. Enjoy them. Don't be in such a hurry to get to the next step. And so that's the same advice that I would give to any young athlete or any young person. Just to do your best to enjoy where you are right now, because you're only going to be here now. You'll never be back here again. Yeah. And I'm not saying you got to, fake it and act like you're loving certain things that you might not love, but just be present with it.
And so, how have your relationships within the community helped to where you are now? And are there any people in the community that really stand out in that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, Vegas is amazing, and even especially growing up here, it's like the smallest big town. Like, the theory of 7 degrees of separation, I'm convinced that Vegas is 1. If I don't know somebody, I know somebody who knows them, right? Like, I can get to Carrot Top with one person, or I can get to the Blue Man Group with one person, or whoever. But growing up here and having the roots and knowing everybody here, it's been great, and I've seen it change a lot and grow, and the community did a really good job getting behind me, as well as my sport. I mean, growing up, there was 2 tracks in Las Vegas. Now there's 4. I'm still involved with some of them, coaching, giving back. Whether it was the news or people that worked for the news channels. I was friends for a while with the mayor of Henderson. She helped get the BMX track started in Henderson. Or even, the relationship that I had with PBS. They covered me when I was competing. And then when I was done competing, they called me and said, hey, do you want to host a TV show for us? Just kind of having those connections in the community of Las Vegas and Henderson has been great.
Awesome. And kind of branch off with the community. Are there any other professional athletes locally here that you kind of work with or do any other community projects together with?
As far as a community project, really the only stuff that I've got going on is with the BMX community and coaching and teaching and doing what I can to give back to the community. I mean, I still coach at the same track that I started at in 1999. And I'm sitting there coaching kids that were born in, this hurts to say, but born in 2017. And, they're sitting in the same starting line that I sat at when I was 6 years old. And that's really cool. And then a lot of times they have no idea, and I think that's a lot of fun. But Vegas is a small town. I've done some work with, the Vegas Golden Knights and the Raiderettes. And, I grew up with Bryce Harper and everybody's just a phone call away if you need something.
Yeah. Cool. So, kind of wrapping it up here, when you reflect on your life and you kind of look back on everything, what do you hope will be your most significant contribution and how you want to be remembered?
The way that I want to be remembered is that somebody who always helped when they could. And whether it's just a one-on-one conversation that I have with a young kid who's struggling, or, it's highlighting a small town in Nevada for our show, or it's a public speaking engagement that I'm doing, and the feedback that I get, you motivated me, you inspired me, you taught me this, you taught me that. it feels good to give back. And I think for me as I'm going to bring this full circle now to the very beginning when I talked about how I loved being an individual sport athlete. I loved it. If I win or if I lose, it's on me. I got nobody else to blame. It's full responsibility. But from the majority of my life so far, I had to be inherently selfish because I was, on team me. And when I worked really hard at something, I would win. I had people to celebrate with, my coaches, my family, my friends. But there's a different feeling when you can put that work into helping others and the reward is helping them. And so I've really enjoyed that in my transition out of sport is I've really enjoyed how I can get the joy of helping others. And that's what's filling my cup now. And, I had one experience that really stands out for me. I did a keynote speech for the here in town. It's called Hope for Prisoners, and it's a organization that helps prisoners transition back into civilian life. And I remember being so nervous before I did that presentation because I was sitting here and I'm like, I'm just this middle class kid who had everything growing up, and I had a beautiful life, and my thing I was most sad about was I got the wrong color bike. How am I going to relate to them? And it ended up being such a great lesson for me because they were, to date, the best crowd I've ever had. They hung on every word. They ooh-gnawed at all the right times. There were tears. And then when I was done, some of the feedback I got was the best feedback I've ever got because it was different. They weren't talking about the peak performance tips that I gave, or they weren't talking about the resilience. I had a gentleman come up to me and say, "You inspired me to be a better father." And I drove home that night in silence. And I was like, I try not to be mad at myself, but I was like, what a great lesson of not judging or not thinking of people a certain way because of maybe something they did previously. And I was almost mad at myself for, thinking that they weren't going to relate to me or that I shouldn't be there or judging them before I went into that room. And it was such a growth moment for me to do that. And that really fills my cup, and those types of things are really what kind of keeps me going and keeps me wanting to continue to give back.
Awesome. That's awesome, man. Cool. Good feeling. That's it.